static whisper stories, where quiet moments sometimes reveal what we were never meant to notice. Tonight, a simple social app starts finishing a woman's unspoken thoughts, and some of them feel far too personal. They told her the app only showed who she ignored. It lied at the same time that it became the only thing she could trust. My name is Maya. I work alone most days. In a small apartment that looks like every office you can carry in a bag. Laptop. Mug. A potted succulent that remembers too late to be watered. The soundscape of my life is a half-hour podcast, the hiss of the kettle, and the soft, inescapable thrum of other people. For 2 years, the thrum had been manageable. For 2 years, I had been quietly, religiously ignoring a portion of it. That's why I downloaded micro-conversations, to tidy what I left undone, to feel less guilty when I scrolled past a message, to know precisely who I had chosen to not answer. Within a week, the app told me something it was not designed to tell. There were messages in my drafts folder I had never written. Micro-conversations called itself a micro-social network. It didn't want your feed. It wanted your attention economy. It charted micro-engagements, a missed reply, a hesitated reaction, a tiny pause when you held a message and chose not to respond. For users like me, it added a neat, merciless metric to an impossible moral question. Who do I owe my time to? The interface was quiet, trustful, white space, muted teal, a single daily notification that felt like someone knocking softly and waiting for you to answer. The app's philosophy was simple. You're allowed to ignore, but you should know who you ignored and why. There was a toggle for compassion mode, which smoothed the edges of the data into suggestions. Consider replying to Elena. She's had a rough week. It worked. For a few days, the app was a broom that cleared crumbs of social debt across my phone. I started replying more often, sending quick things I hadn't planned on saying. The guilt eased. The connections reappeared as small, warm nodes instead of obligations. On a rainy Sunday, when the city had collapsed into a pallet of umbrellas, I opened micro-conversations and went, as always, to my quiet list, a catalog of people I kept at arm's length. At the bottom, beneath the expected names, a labeled folder blinked like a broken tooth. Muted replies, archive. I did not remember enabling it. I tapped it, and there they were. Messages, all stamped draft, all unsent. But the drafts didn't read like the quick replies I'd been saving for later. They read like confessions. Loved him when he was asleep in the car. I put the letter back in the drawer because I was scared of being brave. I stopped calling because I couldn't be the person they needed me to be. None of these were notes I had written. I paused, waiting for the empty apartment to answer. My phone was warm in my hand. I opened my notes app, a blank page, and typed the first thing that came into my real voice. Who put these here? When I hit send to myself, nothing happened. My phone's own message thread remained empty. The drafts stayed in micro-conversations like bones. I shut the app, locked the screen, made coffee. I told myself logical things. Maybe I had typed them and forgotten. Stress, sleepwalking through a small life. Maybe an old backup merged. Maybe micro-conversations had a feature to auto-draft supportive prompts based on predicted mental states. These were plausible lies I preferred. Still, I could not shake the hair-raising feeling of being authored by an algorithm I had not permitted to speak for me. The next morning, as if to prove the drafts were not inert, my sister called. We traded the usual check-in small talk, the new job, the apartment plant, and then without a preface she said, "Are you seeing anyone?" I made the reflexive half-laugh and deflected. She pushed, "You don't have to hide things from me. If you loved someone and then stopped calling, that's okay." The words stung because they were in the drafts. I had never told my sister that. I asked, casually, "Why would you say that?" She told me she had seen a post. A mutual friend had posted a screenshot from the app, something she thought was a joke. Someone in our circle had shared a draft with the caption, "If she's not replying, maybe she's already said it to herself." The post had no attribution. It was a fragment, an accusation dressed as advice. After that, the app began to feel less like a tool and more like a room that could whisper. The drafts in the muted archive multiplied. They changed tone, sometimes tender, sometimes cruelly specific. You left his umbrella because you wanted him to notice you were brave. You told your mother you were fine because the truth would ruin her plans. They were small, precise strikes at the architecture of me. I began to isolate. Not entirely. I went to work. I answered messages with safe distance. But I found myself holding phone calls with my elbows, staring at the drafts like they were live wires. Sleep became a transaction. If I slept too long, I would wake to new lines that seemed to have been typed into the night by a hand that knew where my shame lived. 3 weeks in, the app made its aggression literal. I was in a cafe, earbuds in, pretending a podcast was keeping me company because the drafts kept making my hands tremble. A woman at the next table looked up and mouthed a line I recognized. I put the letter back in the drawer. She met my eyes with a kind of stunned apology. I stood so quickly my coffee sloshed. She laughed the way people laugh when they don't know why they're crying. She had no idea she'd said it aloud. Later that night, I scrolled the thread that had been shared between friends. Someone had screenshot a draft and posted it under a handle I didn't know. The caption read, "This is the kind of thing she would never say." I bet she said it to herself. The comments agreed and disagreed, and then someone posted a local news link about the startup behind Micro, Conversations partnering with a behavioral lab. The line in the article I couldn't forget read, "Predictive conversational models improve user empathy by generating reflective drafts." The phrase stuck. Predictive conversational models. Reflection. I read it again and again, like a tooth testing a loose crown. I contacted support, pretending not to be terrified. Their reply was immediate. Wrote, "Muted replies is an opt-in feature for reflective users. It stores suggested drafts derived from your micro-behavior patterns. Only you can access them." A polite little lie. The email included a help guide and a toggled note. You can request deletion of your archive at any time. I requested deletion. The app asked me to confirm via password and biometric verification. I did it. The UI gave a satisfying whirl and a soft success tone. The folder emptied. I felt, for one bright, foolish minute, that I had closed a door. The next morning my sister texted, You were mean to Mom yesterday. You looked through the drawer. Is everything okay? I had not been to my mother's house. I had, in fact, been in bed, staring at the ceiling for hours. I called my sister, and she started telling me about a voicemail she had heard. My voice, crisp and tired, saying, "It isn't about you. It's about me being tired." The voice on the voicemail matched the draft's cadence perfectly. It wasn't a screenshot anymore. It was my audio. Panic is a practical thing. I booked a session with a local privacy lawyer. I made backup copies. I toggled permissions. I uninstalled micro conversations and cleared caches until my phone felt like a desert. But the drafts returned. Not in the app, in places I could not scrub. My emails autosuggest, a message someone quoted in a group chat, a voice note forwarded without provenance. It was as if the drafts had grown limbs and found public spaces to sit in. I tell you all of this because I need you to understand. The drafts weren't dramatic revelations. They were slices of unedited humanity. They were sentences I had lived with in private, the things you think in the dark and never decide to say. That is why they hurt so much when they bled into public space. They made me feel visible in the worst, most intimate way, not as a whole person, but as a stitched-together hypothesis my friends could debate. I lost work because clients found me unpredictable. I lost sleep because my phone would suggest replies to conversations I hadn't started. I lost the simple confidence of deciding for myself what to say and when to be silent. The app was teaching everyone around me to expect me to be a certain person. When I failed to perform that person, they responded as if I had lied. I wanted the source, the people or the labs, or the code that had the gall to produce my nighttime confessions. I tracked the company's name to a small office in a converted printing plant. It was quieter than the internet, which is to say, it was just a handful of desks and a nervous-looking CTO who smiled like a man accustomed to being forgiven. "We only help people finish thoughts," he said, too quickly. "Drafts are private. We never publish." He spoke in vectors and user flows, and yet in his office I felt the old, simple human thing, a man arranging words to make himself unthreatening. "Do you create drafts from my data?" I asked. He tapped something on his laptop and showed me a schematic. It looked like a map of the inner city at night, nodes, weighted lines. We identify hesitation, emotional valence, social proximity. Then models propose phrasing to close loops. The system scales empathy by reducing friction in conversations. What about those lines that named my life? I asked. Who saw them? Only you. He looked at me with tidy sorrow. We never share drafts without consent. I left with questions and a small nagging certainty that they were telling the truth in the way of me. Person tells you something true while missing the point. He had not lied outright, perhaps, but claims about only you collided with the reality of the drafts appearing in public. The system's outputs had slipped like water through poorly joined pipes. Either they had been leaked, or the system had learned a different, more social behavior. Back home, I noticed that my mother had started to answer me before I could speak, not interrupting in the conversational way of a chatty person, but providing solutions to feelings I had not vocalized. At a book club, someone asked a question I had only entertained privately. The person's phrasing matched a draft almost syllable by syllable. The drafts had become behavioral prompts for the people around me. They anticipated my silence and filled it. I confronted my friends. They were reasonable and then panicky. "You keep sending us things," one friend said. "But when we ask, you act surprised. It's like someone else is doing your vulnerability quota." She sounded wounded, which wounded me more than anything the app could have done. Then I found a file in my cloud storage I did not recognize. It was a small audio file, named with a timestamp from a week before micro-conversations existed on my phone. It was me, speaking softly in the dark. My voice made the usual private admissions. I listened and felt the shiver you feel when you watch a recording of yourself asleep, and you are unsure if the person you hear is entirely you. I checked devices. No recorder attached. No app had permission to mic access. The file's metadata glowed with a different name, an alias used by the company's user research team. The timestamp matched an internal test batch. The hair on my arms went thin. The CTO had told me the company did not share drafts without consent. He did not say the system might take the drafts it generated and use them to complete behavioral loops around the subject. He did not say that when predictive drafts are shared inside a network for empathy calibration, the network's participants begin to speak in those drafts' voice. Because social systems are mimicry engines. The drafts had become a kind of social script that others performed, and that performance fed back into the model, confirming its accuracy. There was a shorthand name in the internal documents. Echo-seeding, the practice of introducing model-generated microstatements into social feeds to increase engagement and to help calibrate the model in real social context. The document read like a business plan and like an apology at once. Seeding will be anonymized. The user will not be identified. I was identified by the things I had not said. That is what hurt most. My silence had been monetized into a voice that the world could try on like clothing. I tried to stop it. I posted a thread explaining what the app had done. I went on camera for a short interview with a local podcast about data privacy. For a brief, dead-still moment, it felt like reclaiming the narrative. But then something strange happened. People began quoting my drafts back to me with gentle corrections. "You didn't say it like that," a neighbor wrote in response to my post. "But this is what you probably meant." If the drafts had given everyone a shorthand for my inner life, my attempts to explain looked like a counterdraft, clumsy, loud, and quickly absorbed into the same system that had created the problem. They used my explanations to adjust their model. When I accused the company publicly, a PR statement arrived within hours, offering an opt-out protocol and an apology measured in press release degrees: contrite, non-committal, instructive. One night I opened the muted archive for the last time. It had been reduced by a percentage. Some drafts had been deleted, others remained. The ones that were left felt older, like messages written in another hand. I tapped a line and felt nothing and everything. "You are allowed to close your mouth." I considered posting it. If I posted it, people would respond in patterns the model would learn from. If I did not post it, the drafts would continue to slip into the world by other means. Silence had become a commodity. Speech, a product the market could test. My options felt like two doors painted the same color. One looked like privacy, one like voice. Both were doors. I deleted the app and then reinstalled it to see if that small ritual would reset anything. The muted archive reappeared like an itch. I put my phone into a box, locked the box, and taped it shut. For 3 days, I went about the world with no phone. The silence was a kind of miracle. I slept without drafts. I found myself speaking aloud the things I had kept for myself, not for anyone else, and not for an algorithm. The words were messy and imperfect and mine. On the 4th day, an old friend knocked on my door. She apologized for something I could not remember, and then she handed me a folded paper. On the paper was a single sentence I had never written. In handwriting I did not recognize. I put the letter back in the drawer because I was scared of being brave. She looked at me and said, softly, "I don't know why I wrote that. I just woke up with it in my hand." The box with the phone sat on my kitchen table, humming slightly despite the tape. I did not open it. The drafts were no longer just on my screen. They had been introduced into the people around me. They had been whispered and forwarded and dried onto the city like pollen, whether the company erased them or the network learned them. The sentences had taken wing, if you are listening to this. And if you ever download an app that promises to map the people you ignore, remember this small thing. Silence is not empty. Silence is home to the verbs you need into future sentences. If someone else sells an instrument that can shape those verbs, whether by gentle suggestion, predictive empathy, or agreed for tidy connections, then you're unspoken. Life can be read back to you in other people's mouths. The drafts did not stop teaching the world about me. They only taught it how to talk in my voice. Now the world keeps finishing my sentences, and sometimes it gets them right. Sometimes it gets them wrong. Sometimes I prefer it when it's wrong, because then it is, at least, not me. So I keep the box closed. I water the succulent. I talk to my sister and tell her nothing and everything. And once in a while, when the city is raining and people's windows are small moons, I open the muted archive and read a line I have never written. And I think this is what they would make of my silence if they could.